I'm Rick Green with the Oklahoman and News OK, covering the state capitol. And with me today is Dave Bond, CEO of OCPA Impact, a lobbying group. And Dave, your group today filed a challenge at the Oklahoma Supreme Court to a proposed ballot initiative having to do with a penny sales tax increase for schools. Could you explain to me a little bit about what's behind the challenge and what your thoughts are on it?
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having us. We did file a challenge this morning at the state Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of a proposed increase of Oklahoma's sales tax that a group led by University of Oklahoma President David Boren has proposed. The proposal is, and we'll get back to this I'm sure in a second, the main two features of the proposal are a pay raise for teachers, an issue that is widely accepted among Oklahomans as something that needs to happen, a priority that needs to get taken care of, but also a tax increase, a 1-cent sales tax increase that sounds more benign than it really is. It would actually result in Oklahoma having the highest total sales tax burden of any state in the country. But we challenged the constitutionality of the proposal of the petition based on the single subject rule, which in Oklahoma state constitution applies not just to statutory provisions, but also to proposed constitutional amendments.
And Dave, this is a rule that states that measures that are brought to the ballot this way need to deal solely with a single subject and not bring in multiple subjects.
Right.
And that's right in the state constitution.
Correct. Article 24, Section 1, I believe, of the Oklahoma Constitution. And as we see it, there are 4 individually distinct subjects that clearly stand out from the petition. Those 4 would be, I mean, the first thing is obvious, the $5,000 teacher pay raise. The second piece, though, has to do with the fact that 40% of the money that's raised by the tax increase, should it take effect, 40% of it would not go to teacher salaries. 40% of it would go to things like higher education and career tech, stuff that's dealt with in totally separate sections of the Constitution from common education, where the teacher pay raise would fit in. The third piece is the tax increase itself, a 1-cent sales tax. Oklahoma, that's basically an additional 1% on top of the 4.5% state rate we already have. You throw in the state or the local and county sales taxes, and Oklahoma would have an average sales tax rate of 9.7%, which would be the highest of any state in the country, higher than the District of Columbia as well. The final piece would be the dramatic reshuffling of the state appropriations process that this petition features. Traditionally, throughout Oklahoma's 100-plus year history, the legislature has had the power of the purse. The legislature is the branch of government that's most directly accountable to the voter, to the citizen of Oklahoma. But this petition would flip that on its head. The State Board of Equalization, an executive branch entity, made up mostly of elected officials, but still an executive branch entity, not nearly as representative of the general voting public in its makeup, would have ultimate authority on state appropriations. And that wouldn't just affect education-related appropriations. It would impact all state government appropriations for roads, bridges, prisons, public safety, et cetera. And those 4 distinct subjects, it seems fairly obvious, make this a log-rolling situation, which makes it unconstitutional.
And getting back to the mechanics of it, while your challenge is being considered by the Supreme Court, proponents of the initiative will not be able to begin to collect the more than 120,000 signatures they need to put it on the ballot next year. Is that correct?
That's correct. We expect the court, in all likelihood, will probably make a determination on this fairly soon. We don't expect it to drag out too long. I mean, it is a fairly time-sensitive deal. It's about putting something on the ballot next year. It takes time to gather signatures. The court knows all that. But it is correct that until the court rules on the constitutionality of this, the signature gathering petition will be held off until the court makes a ruling.
Now, you identified 4 separate areas that seem to indicate separate issues are in play with this proposal, but could the proponents of it argue that at its base we're talking about a single thing, bringing more money to education in Oklahoma?
I don't know that they necessarily could. I mean, take the lottery, for instance. Back in 2004, Oklahoma voters approved the lottery, which was instituting a state lottery to partially help fund public education in Oklahoma. That seems like a fairly altogether deal on the face of it. However, to avoid those log rolling concerns, the lottery proponents split it out into 2 separate ballot questions. Now, the proponents promoted them as a duo, but they still separated them out in part to avoid those log rolling concerns that could derail what they were trying to accomplish.
And by log rolling, you mean a situation, it's a kind of a political technique where a issue that is widely supported is lumped with one that is not supported, and by lumping them together, proponents can get support for something.
That's absolutely right. Raising teacher pay, increasing teacher salaries, it translates well across political parties right now in Oklahoma, across all segments geographically of the state. It's something that voters, citizens, parents, taxpayers across Oklahoma believe needs to happen and needs to happen soon. I don't know that raising Oklahoma's sales tax burden to the highest in the country, which is what this petition would do, is nearly as widely popular a proposal.
What could be done in the alternative to fund more money for education, particularly for teacher salary? Well,
I appreciate you asking that. I don't think it would be too cool of us to try to say that petition isn't a good way to go about it, but we don't have an alternative solution. We need to have an alternative solution, and we do. When you look at the roughly 42,000 teachers in the state today, an average salary of about $44,000, giving each of them a $5,000 pay raise, plus, let's not forget, the other aspect of this is the teacher shortage that a lot of folks are concerned is facing public schools in Oklahoma today. The rough number that most folks are pointing to is 1,000 additional classroom teachers would make a big, big difference right now in Oklahoma. So to do the $5,000 teacher pay raise for all the teachers, plus 1,000 additional teachers at that higher average scale, would cost about $284 million. We have on our website, OCPAimpact.com, outlined where $617 million worth of potential savings and efficiencies and aspects of state government that might be affordable when oil is at $100 a barrel, but maybe not when, maybe shouldn't be priorities when oil is at below $50 a barrel. So if teacher pay raises are a priority, which they are and should be, and is to Oklahomans, let's maybe look at these other resources where maybe not as big a priority of providing those core services to Oklahomans who need it, and look at supporting these teachers instead.
I looked over that list earlier today, and I was intrigued with one item.
Okay.
It's a monastery in Italy, is that right?
Yes, it's a long ways from the great state of Oklahoma, but there is a Italian monastery in Tuscany that is used for the University of Oklahoma's study abroad program. The university owns that. Between the purchase price reported by the Oklahoman of the facility plus the renovations that the Oklahoman has reported on that the university has done to the facility, roughly $20 million. That's the equivalent of providing $5,000 pay raises for 4,000 teachers. And we've got a lot of different pieces like that on there that when you put them together, it's not too hard to determine that there's a path here for not touching core functions, not hurting core functions in the safety net for the less fortunate, roads and bridges, infrastructure, public safety, education in general, but maybe using the dollars we have a little more prudently to focus on those priorities, make sure those quality teachers aren't persuaded to leave the teaching profession, because that doesn't just impact their own families, it impacts the families of the students who are missing out on that quality teacher being in the classroom. And as President Boren has pointed out, that's not the ideal situation. We need to be putting something in place to support those teachers, and so we've offered an alternative option for doing that.
And given that the state is facing a potential budget hole of up to $1 billion, is it really realistic to think that enough savings can be had in the way you suggest to bring more money to bear on poorly funded education?
We'll see how that goes. You know, it was widely reported that it was a $600 million budget shortfall this past legislative session, and yet after the appropriations process, they appropriated $17 million more at the legislature than they had the year before. There were revolving funds that were tapped and different things like that. There won't be as much of that available this time around. There will be some, and we believe too that the list of $617 million in potential savings that we've outlined is not the entire scope of where savings and efficiencies can be achieved. I mean, it includes nothing about what a lot of folks have been talking about, which is potentially looking at how administrative load in public schools has far outpaced student enrollment in recent years. And so even though total funding for public education in Oklahoma per pupil, per child, has been at record highs each of the past few years, too much of that money hadn't gotten into the classroom. Now, that is not on our list. We don't believe that it's necessary to instigate anything between teachers and administrators in order for teachers to get a pay raise. If teachers are getting a pay raise, if that's a true priority, there's a way to do that without the other stuff. The $1 billion budget shortfall, depending on how much ends up being in revolving funds accessible, that's going to be a big part of this. I don't think, from what I've read and learned, I don't know that anyone has a full handle on that yet, and I'm sure the picture will come together in the next few months.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.